Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us. I am Dr. Bonnie Garcia, Statewide Literacy Co-Director with the California Department of Education. It's an honor to be with you today and to be able to focus on today's webinar, which is literacy assessments and screening for risk of reading difficulties. Literacy is a big deal in California, and we are making gains, taking large steps forward because the goal in California is not just to get back to pre-pandemic levels, but surpass them. Understanding and using effective literacy assessment practices is an essential component for us to do just that. Being with us today helps ensure that California's journey stays on the upward trajectory. In this webinar, you will hear from Dr. Ingrid Roberson, Chief Deputy Superintendent Nancy Brendelson, Statewide Literacy Co-Director, E. Fabiashi, Education Programs Consultant. You will also hear from cutting-edge researchers and expert leaders and walk away with resources and guidance to help schools develop and enhance their comprehensive assessment systems, differentiate assessment types and uses, integrate screening for risk of reading difficulties, and leverage your CDE tools and guidance. Thank you again so much for being with us today, and I will now turn it over to Nancy.
I am pleased to be here and share with you our information on literacy assessment and screening for risk of reading difficulties. I'm going to start by, and there you get to see our lovely photos of our Chief Deputy and Bonnie, myself, and Eve, our consultant. I want to share with you our agenda and our objectives for the day, and then Ingrid will be providing some opening remarks. We have resources for you that we will provide a link for in the chat, and then two panels. A panel of assessment experts, and we will introduce them all when we start with that. But just briefly, they are Young-Suk Kim, Dr. Young-Suk Kim from UC Irvine, Matt Brunetti from West Ed, and Dr. Adria Truckenmiller from Michigan State. And then we have another fabulous panel of leaders who will be responding to questions. They are Dr. Carla Estrada from LA Unified, and also Dr. Dennis Wickman and Tim Lopez from Sanger Unified, and more about that afterwards, and then a closing. So our objectives for the day, we're fairly ambitious here. We want to briefly define assessment literacy and offer some CDE and other resources, either state or from the national level. But overall, we want to identify the essential components of a comprehensive literacy assessment system, because as we know, with the advent of the new screening for risk of reading difficulties, that needs to be part of a broader assessment system and a system to support all students. Distinguishing between the types and uses of assessment instruments and processes, and situating screening within a comprehensive plan. Ultimately, we are interested in offering advice to those of you in our audience who are from school districts, county offices of education, and who support those who are LEAs. So with that, I'm going to turn to our Chief Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Ingrid Roberson.
Thank you for that introduction, Nancy. And I just really want to shout out the California Department of Education, which is the backbone agency for education statewide. And Bonnie, Nancy, and Eve are working hard. This is going to be a big year for literacy. We are going through the supplemental ELA, ELD adoption. We are also going to have the literacy PD provider list this year. So there's a lot of moves that are happening statewide provide to give that comprehensive guidance approach to what it means to move the needle around literacy. Appreciate all of you that are in attendance today. You are doing important work for our students. While we have made growth, we had 1.8 growth on our literacy test scores. We know we need to move the needle even more for our students. And so this webinar is going to focus, bring the best of research, and we've got partners coming from UC Irvine, West Ed, as well as Michigan State University. This is the power of Zoom that allows us to reach across the states and learn from others, as well as from folks at districts like LA Unified and Sanger Unified out in the Central Valley, who are making incredible 3-4% plus gains for their students in literacy. And in the state of California, for us, it is the science of reading, it is the science of literacy, as well as the neuroscience. So the research base here needs to be comprehensive to meet our California student population needs. And so while we're focused on literacy, also want to say one of the things that we value here is also biliteracy. We are very fortunate to be so rich in a number of languages, and we have incredible dual language immersion programming that is also happening. So want to make sure, yes, we are moving the needle around literacy. We want students to be able to read by 3rd grade, but also here in California, we care about biliteracy and just all that our students and communities bring, and to really be able to celebrate that as well. And I'm sure you'll hear more about that as we hear from our researchers and our district leaders. So appreciate all of you coming together, taking your time, your energy, and your attention to be focused on this work. So thank you for being here. We are a California community together. And so together we're going to move the needle for students. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over for the next section.
Thank you very much, Ingrid, for those words. And we will resume the PowerPoint and proceed with a couple of quick definitions of assessment literacy. I had an interesting conversation with someone just the other day who said, well, what is that? It's defined as the knowledge about how to assess what students know and can do, interpret the result of these assessments, and apply these results to improve student learning and program effectiveness. So there are different purposes for different audiences. The other definition of assessment literacy that we'll present: assessment literacy refers to the knowledge, skills, and processes associated with designing, selecting, implementing, scoring, and/or using high-quality assessments to improve student learning. Our aim today isn't to make each of us an expert in assessment, but to at least situate the ones we have and the planning that we need to do as a state, as counties, as school districts and schools, for how we will select instruments and interpret the results and use those to improve student learning. We are providing resources for you. We're going to provide a link in the chat shortly. But to situate from the perspective of the California Department of Education, we really are looking at a comprehensive approach to move the needle for student learning in all areas, literacy, mathematics, and science in particular. You'll see best first instruction at the center of the enterprise, planning and development, the work that the adults need to do, and the tiered supports for learning to ensure that all students make progress. Within both best first instruction and tiered supports, assessment takes a prominent role. We can't do that without that information. Some of the resources that we will provide you in the 3-page resource list that we'll link in just a moment. First and foremost, Chapter 8 from the framework. Yes, it's 2014, but it still is a good primer for what we need to do in assessment today. Uh, Another exciting document is from the uh, California County Superintendents. The Curricular and Improvement Support Committee created a toolkit for adopting screening instruments for risk of reading difficulties, but they've added an addendum that has a number of additions for supporting instruction and linking resources and standards to the various tasks and in the screening instruments. And I'll show you a screenshot of that in a moment. We would be remiss if we did not mention tools for teachers, which support smarter balance testing, particularly the interim assessments that are available to school districts, and then the tools that support teachers in learning about assessment and ways they can support students in the classroom. We have a number of articles for you that have been suggested by our panel members, and then some information about a topic we all know and love, and that's money, and for funding for screening of risk of reading difficulties. With that, this is a quick screenshot of one of the documents that is in that CISC toolkit addendum. And this document is called Using the California K-2 Literacy Screeners to Inform Instruction. And the reason, not expecting you to read this on the screen, but they provide links here to the definition of the different areas, the subtest areas. This one is phonological and phonemic awareness for first grade. And you then see a connection to standards, questions to consider, links to evidence-based practices in our literacy content blocks, as well as the subtests that are available in each of the 4 approved screening instruments. So we suggest that you take a look at those as well as the other resources that we have provided. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Eve to give us a little bit of information about what is available to support screening.
Thank you very much, Nancy. As Nancy said, I'm going to share a little bit about literacy screening funding, including the uses. So Assembly Bill 121, Section 88 of the Statutes of 2025 of the Education Omnibus Trailer Bill appropriated $40 million for allocation to LEAs for administration of the approved screeners. This is in addition to the $25 million appropriated in 2024, which was specific to training. The funds are anticipated to be released to LEAs in January of 2026. And this new allocation can be used for a few more things. It can be used for the procurement of screening instruments, as well as screening administration and training for school employees to administer pupil screenings in kindergarten to 2nd grade, but excluding transitional kindergarten, to assess for risk of reading difficulties using the approved screening instruments. Some resources for the literacy screening funding are found on the Literacy Screenings Professional Development webpage, which I will put in the chat for everyone. And there is information on that webpage, including the funding profiles, the funding results, and frequently asked questions for both the 2024 and the 2025 allocations. If you have any questions, the contacts for the screening funding for program questions, so questions about uses of funds, can be directed to the Professional Learning Innovations Office at plio@cde.ca.gov. And then if you have fiscal questions, you can reach out to the Categorical Allocations and Audit Resolution Office at caar@cde.ca.gov. And with that, I will pass it back over to Nancy. Thank you.
Thank you, Eve. We're so happy that there is funding to support this new requirement. With that, we will turn to our first panel of assessment experts. And they are Dr. Young-Suk Kim, who is a professor at the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Kim is known for her expertise in literacy and in assessment. And in fact, she was the chair of the RDRSSP, the Reading Difficulties Risk Screener Selection Panel, that identified the screening instruments that we have adopted in California. She has extensive experience in teaching and research and specializes in higher order cognitive skills, dyslexia, listening comprehension, and oral language, and working with children who are multilingual. Our next panel member is Matt Brunetti from West Ed, and he is famous for helping us as a psychometrician to staff the RDR SSP, the panel. He specializes in early childhood assessments, psychometric analysis, and assessment design. He's a senior program associate with the Assessment Research and Innovation Team and directs large-scale assessment and research projects for West Ed. And then our third panel member is Dr. Adria Truckenmiller. She is from Michigan State University, where she is an associate professor of special education and school psychology, and co-developed multi-tiered system of support degree program there at MSU. Before going to MSU, she was with the Florida Center for Reading Research and the Regional Education Laboratory Southeast. She is well known in assessment circles, and we are very pleased to have them all here today. And so we're going to begin by asking questions of our panel members. And these are the 4 areas that we will be exploring with them. The essential components of a comprehensive literacy system, distinguishing between the types and uses of assessment instruments and processes, incorporating screening for risk of reading difficulties into such a system, and then advice for creating and or improving assessment plans and processes. With that, I'm going to invite Dr. Kim to, in fact, all of our panel members to put themselves on screen. And Dr. Kim will answer the very first question. Dr. Kim, can you discuss what you think the essential components of a comprehensive assessment system are?
Yes. Hi, Nancy. Hi, everyone. Great to have you here. This is a great question. Thank you for so much. So comprehensive assessment system requires several interconnected components working together to support student learning. Do you mind moving to the next slide? The figure with the 5 components. Thank you so much. Yes. So let me walk you through each of these essential elements that I have 5 of them. The first one is we need a multi-tiered assessment structure. So this structure includes universal screening, diagnostic assessment, progress monitoring, classroom-based assessment, and benchmark assessments. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next question. And the next component is, let's go back. Yes, the next component is our assessment system must align with the science of reading. This means that we are systematically assessing the critical components of reading development informed by scientific evidence. And the third component of this comprehensive system is that we need a robust data management system. And we need a centralized platform for collecting data and analyzing data. And it should be accessible to teachers, specialists, and administrators, or anyone who needs information to make instructional decisions. And the fourth component is establishing clear decision-making protocols. It's not enough to collect the data, right? Collecting data is not the goal. The goal is we need to use that data to make instructional decisions, right? So what matters is what to do with it. And this includes interpretation of assessment results, plan and procedures for tiered instruction, and information about how to implement it. We also need parent communication processes in place because families are essential partners in this work. And then finally, none of this works without a strong professional learning component. Teachers and educators need ongoing professional learning and support for proper assessment administration, data interpretation, implementation, and culturally responsive practices for assessment and instruction, right? And working with students from various linguistic and cultural backgrounds, including our multilingual learners. And when we can create an assessment system that truly serves our students when all these 5 components work together. Nancy, back to you.
Thank you. And now I'm going to ask Matt Brunetti to answer the same questions. What are the essential components of a comprehensive literacy assessment system or a plan for a school district?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Nancy and Bonnie, and it's an honor to be here with Drs. Truckenmiller and Kim as well. A lot of my response overlaps what Dr. Kim just shared with you all. Early literacy assessments work best when they are together and part of a comprehensive system. And what does that mean? It means it supports instruction and it supports intervention, and that it also utilizes multiple assessment types, including screening, diagnostic, progress monitoring, formative and summative assessment. I know these terms are used a lot, and as an assessment expert, often I use them as well. But what I found in my time working in assessment is that sometimes these assessment definitions mean different things to different people. So I wanted to share what they mean to me and how I am interpreting them. But I want to say that essentially the bottom line that I'm trying to convey is that it's important to understand what the assessment that you're using can and cannot do for you, what that data means, and what are its limitations, because no assessment can do everything. And so for me, screening is pretty clear, and that is what Dr. Kim just led the panel last year in selecting the 4 screening instruments in California. But that's really a quick assessment, similar how do you go to the doctor and your annual blood tests, to see who needs additional support. And ideally, while the legislation requires it only once a year, ideally it's probably best to try to screen at least 2 or 3 times per year. That's your first step in that multi-tiered system that Dr. Kim just mentioned. Then diagnostic assessments help you to dive a little deeper. What are those specific skills that those students who are flagged by the screener, what are those skills that they might need additional assistance with? And that's an important thing to do. So it's not necessarily an assessment that you need to do with all of your students right away. It's those that the screener has indicated might need to take a deeper dive into looking at their skills and where they might need additional support. And then as you're hopefully applying interventions and instructional decision-making around those screening and diagnostic results, the progress monitoring would then come in to see, are these working? Is the student making progress towards your goals? Of course, as classroom teachers, and I was a classroom teacher not only in California, but also in Colorado and Massachusetts, you have your day-to-day assessments, your formative assessment process, your classroom assessments. You have all of those other pieces of data that are helping you on a day-to-day basis as teachers, making sense of that. And of course, the assessments that probably most of us are familiar with are the summative ones that goes not only from the CASP and Smarter Bounds assessments, but to any end of unit or whatnot, assessments that kind of result in the culmination and whether you're really trying to see have the goals and expectations been met. And of course, the skills that are important in these literacy assessments have to be those foundational reading skills. I will defer to Dr. Truckenmiller to talk more, probably in more detail about those. But honestly, what those are: phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Those 5 pillars that are well documented in the science of reading, to support and that you're making those things. And of course, later on, or simultaneous to initial writing and analysis skills. So that would be, in conjunction with Dr. Kim's answer, that I feel like I just supported a bit more about that. But really, if I had to say it all, it's working together and knowing what the assessments that you're using are doing to help you support students in the best way that you can. And so with that, I will pass it over to Dr. Truckenmiller. We'll come back to this slide later.
And thank you, Adria. We'd like to hear from you. The same question: how would you define the essential components of a comprehensive assessment plan?
Thank you, Nancy, and California. I'm really excited to be with you today. Your state is doing some model work for others in the country, so I'm delighted to see that and use it as an example. So I've been collecting lots of evidence and sitting in a million data meetings, trying to find what works best and how to situate all of these different data pieces. And so trying to boil that down to the smallest possible components of what it is you need to start with and what would be most effective to start with. And so I 1000% agree with Dr. Kim. The number one thing to focus on is where this data gets you. So not collecting it for its sake, but what's the instructional decision that you're going to make? And so we've been spending a lot of time taking those terms that Matt so helpfully presented and translating them into direct instructional decisions. So instead of saying make instructional decisions, I point to 4 major decisions that you can make using the data from those screeners that are on your current list. And so I'll walk through those 4 decisions. And this is where you'll get the most power from using the data that you have in front of you. And you have these large score reports in front of you, and it's really difficult to know which score on there answers that particular question. And so I created this chart to point you towards the score on that report that answers that question. And the example I'm going to use for each of these 4 questions, I'm going to use Dibble's M-Class as my example, but the other assessments on your list also have the score types that will answer these particular questions. So the very first question, as Matt indicated, that a screener does the best is identifies who needs that supplemental or more intensive instruction. And so there will be a score, an overall score, a benchmark score that if students are performing below that composite score or benchmark score, those are the students who will need that supplemental or more intensive instruction. And the reason that score was chosen and the particular assessments were chosen for the list is because it has evidence of doing a good job of that. And it has evidence of sensitivity. So sensitivity means it's going to pick up most of the kids who are the most needed, who would most benefit from that supplemental instruction. And so you want to look for that. That's the evidence we use to select screeners that do that. The second big question that a lot of administrators want to answer is, okay, we know a large percentage of our students, let's say we have lots of schools in Michigan that have 70% of students who are not proficient on the state test. And so we know we need to adjust our overall Tier 1 curriculum. but then you run out of data on what it is you need to adjust on that curriculum. And two of the biggest areas we can focus on that have the biggest bang for our buck in changing our curriculum are looking at how well our curriculum is doing for the code side of reading, that decoding phonics side of reading, and how well our curriculum is doing for that language or vocabulary, listening comprehension side of reading. So, for example, the Dibbles M class, you have the fluency measure, the Dibbles fluency measure, whatever it is. There's different measures between kindergarten, first and second, third grade. That will tell you how much you need to adjust the code side of your tier 1 instruction. And then the vocabulary on the M class will tell you how much you need to adjust that language comprehension side of reading. And these measures, you can tell what does a good job of those different things if they have a correlation with external measures of those similar constructs. Every DA meeting that I sit in on, teachers are like, yeah, I know which of my students are likely need more effective instruction. So this particular score, this overall score, doesn't help teachers as much in their particular role. And so they're looking at different scores on the report that comes out. And so they might be looking for something like, how do I group my students for small group instruction? And so when they see students who were very far from the benchmark score, so on Dibble's reports, they tend to be flagged in red. Those are the students that you'll want to make sure when you're meeting with your small groups that those small groups are the most frequently met with small groups. So if you're meeting, you want to make sure you're meeting with those small groups every day, whereas the students in the green and the blue, you could probably meet with them less often. We have great data to show that those students can benefit a lot from that independent reading time, that you don't want to provide independent reading time to kids who don't know how to decode yet. So those types of, that's more fine-grained information. And what I mean is you're looking at, on the Dibbles, you're looking at their accuracy. On the words, you're looking at vocabulary. If you have a measure that provides sentence structure, Amira, for example, has a really nice measure of sentence structure to give information about that. That helps identify the skills that to work on within your small group time. And most of the time you want a little bit more deeper pieces of information, especially interventionists who are working with those lowest performing students. They want even more fine-grained information. And it's really exciting right now that we are in a time where there's new assessments. And I'll tell you that the exciting direction that I'm seeing lots of places go is in teacher education, teacher preparation, as well as in schools. Currently, we're shifting from old ways of assessment. So one of the most common ways of assessing kids that everybody was taught in their teacher prep programs was using an informal reading inventory. So this looks a lot like the Fountas Pinnell benchmark assessment system or the Teachers College running records, where you listen to a kid read and then you ask them some questions, or even with other curriculum-based measurement tools where you tell a story and have the student retell that story. We now have better ways, more accurate ways to get that fine-grained information that teachers want. And so I'm really excited about that. My colleague at UT Austin, Jess Tost, and I just produced a special issue that we put in the journal Intervention in School and Clinic, where you can take your Dibbles scores, for example. So you listen to a kid read on an oral reading fluency passage, and you can do an analysis of which phonics patterns you need to work on next. And so we have an article about that. We have fine-grained analysis of the language side of things in writing. There's a really amazing reading comprehension measure that gets specifically at inferencing that's really helpful. So those are the four decisions that I think makes it much clearer if we say this is the decision that we're making and this is the score that we're using to make that decision, and I can feel confident that this is a great direction to go because we have evidence to say that this score does that decision. Thanks, Nancy.
This is a shot of Adria and her co-author, and that particular article is referenced in your resource list. So I'm going to ask you all a few more questions. And we've been hearing a lot about the screening and MTSS and all of the decisions we need to make for children who need additional support. But there are other parts of a school district's assessment plan. And so how would you distinguish those other types of assessments that may go into a more comprehensive plan? And I will just go back to Dr. Kim and ask her if she could speak to that.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, Matt actually went over this very well. So, if you don't mind, Nancy, sharing the
Let's
slide that I have, the four squarish looking one.
Sure, I will reshare the
Thank you.
PowerPoint. Just give me a half a second here.
Sure. So Matt went over universal screening, diagnostic assessment, progress monitoring, summative, informative. So what I have in the PowerPoint slide is right before there. There you go, four of them. So I listed only formative assessments, and Matt went over the first three, right? So I will just quickly review, just start with the universal screening to identify, to really cast a wide net to identify students who might have some initial signs of difficulties, right? And then move into identify the causes of those difficulties. That's diagnostic. And then for students who we are providing intervention, we want to monitor their progress. That's progress monitoring. We do very frequently, weekly, bi-weekly. So that's what Matt covered already beautifully. One other piece of formative assessment that I might just add here is classroom-based assessment. So this is not usually formal one. This is what teachers do every day, including exit tickets, quick writes, observation checklist, or asking comprehension questions. And I listed this because this is what teachers do every day, and using this daily classroom-based assessment data in conjunction with universal screening, diagnostic, and progress monitoring is important. That's how we make a difference, right? To make systematic instructional decisions. And Matt said all the things beautifully, and Adria also said like a lot of important details. One thing that I would say, I know people know it, but just say it, I'll say it one more time. So different assessments serve different purposes and they have different features. And so we have to use right assessment at the right time for the right purpose, right? One thing related to universal screening is that we cannot use that result to identify students who have learning disabilities or purposes other than screening. I know people know it. I just wanted to emphasize one more time. Thank you. Back to Nancy. Or Matt or Adrian.
Same question for you, Matt.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add, to be honest, but I think that's really the crux of the matter is understanding is understanding the assessment and the data you're getting from it and what it can and cannot be used for, right? And I think that is the tough part, and that goes back to what you mentioned earlier on in the webinar, Nancy, with like what we would call assessment literacy, essentially.
Right.
And I think that are there some instruments that potentially can do more than one purpose? Yes, potentially, but you have to look at the evidence to make sure that it does that, right? And not just take it for what it's worth. So, really, it's hard to kind of give a blanket statement to say which are those assessments, but just ask the difficult questions of the assessments, right? Dig into the weeds with them and make sure that they are doing exactly what you expect them to do, and that they're not misleading you in anything. So that's the only thing I would think I would add, other than the definitions that we've all shared. And Adria had some nice, I tried to stay out of the technical weeds for this webinar, but she had some nice numbers there. But I know that Dr. Kim and the rest of the panel did a lot of that hard work on the screeners. So you can trust those. But just as your other assessments that you might use to support the system, you might need to dig a little deeper in there.
And thank you, Matt. And we will provide this PowerPoint to everyone who's registered for this uh, webinar today so that you'll have those numbers that Adria shared with us. And so I'll just do a variation on that question, Adria, and ask you, where do you place something that we might call an interim assessment or benchmark assessment that districts tend to offer?
That's a great question. Yeah, so the interim assessments, I think, fall under that category that Dr. Kim showed of the classroom-based assessments, because they typically are aligned to standards, and so they'll help with guiding folks towards those pieces. Um, I'll add another specific example to this particular topic that we're talking about, because I find it to be helpful in meetings, in data meetings, where when people are looking for answering their specific questions, um, they'll often use a score for a purpose that is not intended for. So, for example, Dibble's eighth and all of our other curriculum-based measurements, they all will, rightly so, rely on one subtest score more than another for its overall benchmark. So something like oral reading fluency is very powerful for predicting overall reading performance, especially in second, third, fourth grade. But then we'll say, okay, when that student is below benchmark on oral reading fluency, oh, well, they must need a reading fluency intervention. But that's actually, we tend to find in research that decoding interventions work much better for those particular students. And so it's understanding that that score is a larger grain size. So it's actually representing overall reading achievement as opposed to the area that we want to intervene with. And so that gets at all of these concepts brought together into a specific example.
That's very helpful. And I think if I were planning an assessment system for my school district, I would have all three of you on speed dial so that I could ask these questions.
Just to actually, you asked about
Please.
interim, so just to jump in, because I think that's a word that we didn't include in our slide. I didn't include in my slide, but I often use it a lot. And interims vary. Like they probably vary the most in terms of how they use. Some of them are excellent predictors at end of year summative assessments, right? And they're kind of more in a summative design, like evaluating standards from a chunk of time or even throughout the year. So, whereas some are designed and or have the capabilities of maybe supporting more diagnostic-based assessments. So that's really what interims are a great example. I just want to say of where you want to dig in a little bit more, to make sure that you understand what your results mean, because it can vary quite a bit. Same thing. And interim and benchmark tend to get used interchangeably. So
Yep.
really, I don't want to get into the weeds of like naming as long as like the bottom line, I think, is understanding what the data are telling you. That's what our technical definition of validity is. Is it valid for the appropriate interpretation of test scores that the interpretation you're gonna make based on the test scores?
Thank
Man,
you.
can I add one more thing? What just adding to what Adria said, because I think this is a really important point. So when we have an assessment, one of the difficulties that I see with my pre-service and in-service teachers is mapping skills and construct with the assessment, right? So the example of text reading fluency is very good one because it's widely used because it's very predictive of, future reading outcomes such as reading comprehension. But what does that tap into? And then why do students do well and not do well in text reading fluency, right? The same thing with word reading. What students do well and not do well in word reading, why? And the same thing with listening comprehension, right? So that's where I think this connecting assessment with the science of reading and validated theoretical models and having an understanding is very important.
Okay, I think we've all learned a lot, and I want to go to the lightning round now, and that is, what's your one piece of advice that you would offer school districts and schools as they look at their overall picture of their assessment system, their plans? And I will go to Adria first.
Great. Yeah. One thing that we found works in across the literature is something called a school-wide assessment team. And so this is putting together a group of folks at your school who spend a lot of time learning how to administer the assessments so that they can come through each classroom. You have like 5 people who come together and they assess a whole classroom at a time and then move to the next and move to the next. It relieves a lot of the initial burden in implementing a new assessment system because you relieve some of the teachers' anxiety about having to learn to use it. And then we did a time analysis of this SWOT approach, school-wide assessment team SWOT approach, and found that it reduces the amount of instructional time lost. So and it also increases the accuracy of the screening assessment because it's a set of people who have worked on getting themselves really reliable in administering and scoring, and that's their only job, so that the teachers can focus on teaching, and then it's just like 1 or 2 students pulled out of the classroom at a time, so less instructional time is lost. So it seems to be a nice entry into, especially if this is a new process for schools.
Thank you for that. Dr. Kim, any last advice?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I want to acknowledge all the district schools and teachers are already doing tremendous amount of work, and I recognize that because there are multiple initiatives going on in addition to um, screening assessment. So I want to recognize that. But if I can offer one piece here is prioritizing support for teachers in translating assessment data into actionable instruction. Right? As I said earlier, this is where, at least my experience, pre-service and in-service teachers really have hard time not administering tests or even interpreting results, but really what's the next step, right? So it's taking that data and figuring out, okay, what do I actually do now with this information in my classroom tomorrow, next week? So, I would say this is particularly challenging when it comes to developing differentiated instruction plans that are practical and sustainable. So my advice is to build robust, ongoing support systems that specifically focuses on this data to instruction bridge. So this might include something like providing curriculum-specific guidance that shows how assessment data maps onto instruction. So Nancy, I love the what DOE had, right? So the one you shared in slide 11, that resource that looks at the mapping of assessment for different screeners and the skill phonological awareness. Something similar, but extension to some specific curriculum or reading programs teachers use, right? Another one is to make this happen, creating time for collaborative planning where teachers can work together on differentiation strategies and also offering coaching that helps teachers make practice, the teachers practice turning data into kind of a concrete lesson plans or adjustments.
Thank you very much. And I'll just let Matt have a really quick last word.
Sure, because I would reiterate what Adria and Young both have said. I'm going to add one more that we haven't talked about yet, but I want to really give a +1 to theirs. But also, I'm going to add communicate clearly with families about what this is about. It's about support, not punishment. It's about trying to establish that, and I think establishing that communication with families is a really important piece. It's one we often overlook. I understand why we're so busy trying to do our instructional pieces, but it is and it is also a challenging one. But I encourage everybody to do that to the best. So in short, I would say this is all of ours probably is collaborate and communicate.
Well, thank you very much. And I just applaud you all. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Garcia, who will be moderating the very next panel, which we're looking forward to. Thank you very much, Bonnie.
Hi, thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Young, Matt, and Dr. Adria. I now have the pleasure of introducing you to some very strong and impactful leaders from both LAUSD and Sanger Unified School District. We have Dr. Carla Estrada, who has spent over 25 years as an outcomes-focused leader. She's a proud graduate of LAUSD and currently serves as LAUSD's Deputy Superintendent of Instruction, which includes supervision and support of over 1,000 schools in the second largest school in the entire country. Dr. Estrada heads a dedicated team of district and school leaders working towards achieving educational success for over 460 diverse students in Los Angeles. That's as big as some states. In partnership with families, students, and staff, Dr. Estrada is responsible for the day-to-day and long-term instructional efforts with the aim of boldly meeting the strategic goals that are set by the superintendent and Board of Education that ensure that students are ready for the world. We also have Dr. Wickman, who is the superintendent of Sanger as of 2023 after 24 years in the district with the goal of building on the district's success. He has been the district's assistant superintendent of human resources and supervisor of child welfare and attendance. He holds a master's in school psychology and a doctorate in educational leadership. Dr. Wickman was from Fresno County, was the Fresno County Administrator of the Year in 2019, and he credits his success to the teachers who took an interest in him as a struggling student for his success. We also have Mr. Tim Lopez as the Associate Superintendent of Ed Services at Sanger Unified School District. Mr. Lopez has been instrumental in shaping the district's educational landscape. His role involves overseeing the district's educational services, ensuring that they meet the needs of the community and the students within. Mr. Lopez's leadership is characterized by a commitment to continuous improvement, community engagement, and data-driven decision-making. And with that, I will share with you the questions that we will pose to both Dr. Estrada, Dr. Wickman, and Mr. Lopez. Starting out with the first question, and this question I will pose to you, Dr. Estrada. And the question is, if you could describe your district's literacy assessment plan. Oh, it looks like the questions went away. Let me grab them. If you could describe your district's literacy plan and how it has contributed to your success in improving your students' achievement in literacy. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Estrada.
Well, thank you again for having me here today and just sharing our journey, our learnings, and the work ahead. As was shared earlier by the panel speakers, when you're trying to think about what do we know works for kids in building literacy skills, while at the same time knowing that all of our kids are so different. You described the size of my district. You described, we have over 500,000 culturally and linguistically diverse students. So we need to be able to not only ensure consistency across our schools, what we sometimes call coherence, but we also have to be able to differentiate to student needs. And so that's equally important. So here are a couple ways in which we've been able to do that. One, we start with our professional development. As many of the speakers spoke about, that underlying fundamental element to our professional development is that it's grounded in multi-tiered systems of support. MTSS is critical in order to ensure that all students are getting their instruction, but also making sure that we're meeting the needs where they are. So we make sure that it's grounded in MTSS. We also make sure that there's foundational elements of literacy in reading, writing, as well as listening and speaking, especially because I have a large number of English learners. So we need to make sure we understand that element as much as we understand those foundational literacy skills. And I think the other thing that's really important is that we also have been focused in our professional development of understanding that assessment is meant to inform instruction. So how, as we're building those literacy skills, how do we ensure that that assessment data is not just sitting on the side there, it's part of your planning time. It's part of how we use our decisions on resources and other types of supports that schools receive. So that professional development has been grounded in a variety of different areas, as I shared, but most importantly, we also, because our interventionists and our coaches are such an instructional part of our strategy, we want to make sure that they're also getting specialized training. We want to make sure every school has folks there that really can go deeper with them. The second thing we've done is never lose focus on the things that matter most. And our standards, understanding where we're trying to get our students to, that focus on our ELA, ELD standards, make sure that that good first instruction is always the approach we take. Now, we have created consistency across our schools around a core curriculum that does reflect the science of reading as well as is culturally and linguistically responsive. No curriculum is perfect though, my friends, so I do want to say that to you. You have to make sure you understand who your kids are first and then making sure that you leverage the curriculum with fidelity, but always know that supplemental resources are critical. So this is why with standards-based tasks, we also make sure that our folks know where does CKLA, for example, around Language Studio, how it's helpful for our English learners, but also recognizing that that rigor must not get lost. And so how do we support that as we're making sure that all students are accessing their learning? The other piece with good first instruction is that how we use that assessment data, our data reports, we use iReady, for example, for our diagnostic as well as ongoing monitoring of performance aligned to literacy. We want to make sure that it provided meaningful data that then our teams could be able to, whether it's at the school level, district level, or region level, could look at the data and make some good informed instructional decisions, such as small group, so on and so forth. So really important, which leads to that last piece in good first instruction, that differentiation. And that includes advanced learning opportunity. Too often we think of small group instruction in literacy as not an opportunity to actually increase rigor. It's a perfect opportunity to do that. And so we try to model that for our schools. Third big piece in our literacy strategy is their intervention and tutoring. Now, intervention is a critical element of understanding and meeting kids where they are. Now, this year we have added the universal K-2 screener. And so one of the things we had to be very careful with the screener is how do we make sure that we give kids enough time, because I sometimes have students who this kindergarten experience may be their first time going to school. So we want to make sure that we provide for them the opportunity to be able to engage in the learning of schooling, understand what that means, and some time to really understand the fundamental skills that they need, those foundational literacy skills before we did the screener. And so that's been our approach so far, and we will continue to, based on the results that we have, make decisions on additional supports based on that screener. We're also looking at tiered interventions. There isn't just one way to meet students where they are, and so we model different resources that we have. So we do a lot of U-Fly training, we do letters training, Orlin Gillingham training. So we have a variety of ways in which we can support students further. And so we make sure that our teachers know, including in the area of writing. That has definitely been a place of growth for us as well. Progress monitoring, of course. And then, of course, I can't say it enough. So if we have our special educators on, if we have our ELD teachers on, please know that they have to be a critical part of the planning team, whether it's at the school level or district level. They know I expect them to work together because teachers don't get to decide what kids come into their classroom that day. They have to welcome all kids. And so how we plan and work together has been really important. I think this is why you see our results where they are. And then lastly, very important is our family engagement in the literacy strategy. We have parent academies that we offer for our families where they can come and learn about what are the components of literacy. We've also partnered with families and schools and other organizations to help clarify for families what is the science of reading. And it's really neat to be able to see them describe how the brain learns reading in multiple languages, so they also understand why being able to read with their children or provide books to kids, those kinds of small experiences that can grow to such big things, is so important. And then we also share some resources for home literacy. And the last piece I mentioned earlier, those data reports are really important to us. So I want our families to make sure that not only do they know where their child is, but where they need to go and how they can support them. And so your data, how you use that data to communicate a story, tell families where their children are, but more importantly, ultimately, you want your kids to be able to share with them where they are and where they're going. It makes my heart happy when I hear kids say, I know where my next step is. And ultimately, that's what we're all trying to get to. So with that, I think I've shared the big picture of our literacy plan. And quite frankly, we keep learning and changing as we go and as we see the results.
Thank you, Dr. Estrada. And it sounds like your students are also using the data to find out where they're at and figuring out how to drive their own learning, which is amazing. I'm going to turn the same question over to you, Dr. Wickman and Mr. Lopez. If you could describe your district's assessment plan, how has it contributed to your success in improving students' achievement in literacy?
Absolutely. And I'll start and then I'll kick it over to Mr. Lopez. But extremely honored to be here to also be able to share Sanger Unified's journey. And Sanger Unified has been working on this process going back 2005, 2006 and ongoing. And a lot of the stuff that we've heard, and love hearing Dr. Estrada kind of coming through, the strategies that have been done there, which are successful in a large school district, are almost identical to what we were doing. We got there step by step, working with our staff and our guiding coalitions, coming through to make sure that all of our staff, our teachers, our principals, everybody knew the direction that we were going and getting input on that to make sure that everybody had buy-in. And a couple things that you've heard that resonate also, and I know Mr. Lopez will dive into, data driving decisions. We are a data driven district, but it has to be reliable. It has to be valid. The teachers have to believe it is valid, and then it can drive instruction and then ultimately support the students in their success. And we've got interim assessments coming through. What you see, and I know this is focused on K through 3 literacy, but you have it all the way through all of our grade levels because it's the same idea and same philosophy. And before I'll turn it over to Mr. Lopez, just a quick story. I was walking through a 7th and 8th grade classroom last year. We use iReady also, and I know Dr. Estrada talked about that. And the work that the teachers and staff did with the students from interim assessment 1 to assessment 2, one of the male students came up and was excited to show me that he had met his stretch goal within that. And that just built into the system, and there's a lot that goes to it. But if it's done correctly, man, the students taking over and having ownership and just building on that. And you see that across all of our grade levels. So kind of the 40,000 foot view. And then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lopez, who can dive in very specifically with our screeners and assessments. Tim?
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Wickman. I think one of the things that he did talk about is that level of consistency. And I took a little bit different approach from a practitioner standpoint. Is before you on the slide on the far left is our assessment plan for the entire system. And in Sanger Unified, what has made us move and progress is a consistency and coherence across every classroom with every teacher in every school. Now, we only have 13,000 students, a little bit different than LA Unified, but nonetheless, that consistency and understanding the why of assessment is important. So if you look at, this is just the assessment plan. Again, this not only includes our early literacy, but it includes the diagnostic, the CASP. It includes in the middle our IABs and FIABs, because we know that those standards are important for us as well for determining how students will do on the CASP. And again, that really is for third grade at the lowest. And to the right is our assessment that takes place from the 9th through 12th grade. I think that's important to understand is that we're all in this together with how we use assessment and what that assessment plan looks at. And I want to emphasize that systemic approach because plans are great, theoretical is great, but if you don't do something and do something well systemically, it's not going to propel you to the next level that you want with students. And one of the things Dr. Wickman has always impressed on us is that we expect every student to have one year of growth or more. And so through this process, we're able to do that.
Yeah, and Bonnie, just quickly adding to that, a lot of the stuff that we've heard, the MTSS and the response to intervention, using those screeners, and we've used DIBELS and now DIBELS M-Class, being able to go through, and you'll see that on the assessment calendar, but then being able to go through and set those groups, that tier 3 group or tier 2, and provide the specifics for then the interventions to work on there. And we talk a lot about best first instruction also, which I think you've heard from the research side of it. LA Unified mentioning it and coming to us. We know, and we look at that data all the time. Where are the percentage of students falling within that? Do we have too many falling in tier 2 or tier 3? And do we need to adjust that tier 1 instruction to make sure that we are being more effective with all of our students, so then we can be very targeted with those that truly need the support.
And if you take a look at the next page, some specific examples that we've used. Now, we've used DIBELS, as Dr. Wickman said, since 2005. Then it was not the M-Class, which we just have this past year, but with it was focused on the fluency piece. And back then, I was an elementary principal. We used what we called RTI, and we also had some guided reading. So it was focused, although it was a little bit different. Nonetheless, we did have the tier 1, 2, and 3 through our RTI program, which now we include in our MTSS. In addition to that, we do use iWriting diagnostic, and that helps us with what we would call our tier 2 interventions. It's looking at students that have specific deficiencies and standards that we want to address. And by the way, we do set aside time for not only the tier 1 instruction, but in each and every schedule, in each every classroom, there's time for tier 2 as well as time for tier 3. So setting aside the time, and again, from a systemic point of view, I think is an important piece. We also use a K2 literacy screener as we transition from the guided reading prior to COVID to the science of reading and letters training we've had over the past 3 years. We do know that the emphasis of the decoding and phonics needs to take place. And this literacy screener allows us to focus in that small group instruction, either in that code or in the meaning focused instruction that occurs. And Dr. Truckenmiller, we still use a little bit of the BAS system for our students that are working on the reading comprehension. It's some of the pieces we've held from the beginning. Now, I do want to emphasize this, and it's not on here, but something that we take great pride in is our work with our preschool and TK with the ECHRS program. So making sure the learning foundations and that continuum from preschool, TK, K, all the way up to third grade is an important piece. It doesn't just start in kindergarten. It doesn't just start with dibbles. It starts when our students enter preschool, and we have a very comprehensive preschool throughout our entire district. And our TK, we really appreciate the state's approach with TK. We have TK classrooms at every one of our schools, and those students are getting ahead. And the better we understand those foundational skills, the better they are with their literacy. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Wickman and Mr. Lopez. It's apparent that both in LAUSD and at Sanger, screening was already kind of in place. And now there's this new legislation that does require screening once a year. And I did note both of you sharing how it really, all of your assessments drive your instruction, but this is also a tool that is used to determine where students are at, what may be best first instruction needs to also include and focus on, and then what tiered levels, what tiered supports need to include and who it needs to include. And so a follow-up question to that is, if you could maybe explore, if you could describe a little more on how specifically, especially with this new legislation, how you've been able to incorporate screening for risk of reading difficulties into your plan. And you've already shared a bit of that. So if there's anything else that you would want to add, and also possibly any key messages that you have for educators and families. There's a lot of questions about how do we implement this? How do we implement this so that it's effective? And so I'm going to turn this question over to you first, Dr. Estrada.
So, to your point, we do have a comprehensive assessment plan. However, with the screener, there's a new opportunity, but there's a couple things we had to consider though. One, we had to make sure that our system knew why the screener was valuable, what it was going to do for us, what was it going to do for students, and then how were we going to then use that data to inform decisions. That's why I said my special education team, my med team, or my multicultural multi-education program comes together along with the Division of Instruction to really understand what the data is showing, because we want to make sure people understood what was the purpose of the screener. One of the things we found is we had to make sure we also staggered. One of the key concerns our teachers shared with us is they were concerned as well, some of our families, how much were we assessing children, or how much time were we using that? So the why was important, then came the how. And so we want to make sure we staggered it, but also, as I shared, for some of my students, this is the first time they're experiencing schooling, so we wanted to make sure they had that. I think the second piece is helping inform families about what this means. Because one of the things as we're preparing for the results of the screener, we want to make sure that families, one, know what that data is telling them, and then what our next steps are to ensure that we're supporting the child, or if we really are highly concerned about something, that there are other steps we can take, and then how the school will work with them to be able to address those things. So being able to do those two elements was important. I think the last one that I just want to add is that we also needed to create an alternate screening method, because we have a large number of students where the English is not at all in their language yet. And then we also needed to make sure that we could provide supports on an ongoing basis as they're developing the language, but we also didn't want to wait to see if there was something more we needed to do. So how do we do that? So we created alternate methods to be able to communicate that, which included looking at it from across different languages. What are some common errors that some of our students would make? For example, if they were Korean speakers versus Mandarin speakers versus Spanish speakers versus Arabic speakers. So the diversity in that could also contribute. So we wanted to come up with alternative methods for that as well.
Those are really great considerations, and I am in complete agreement. We need to really talk to our families, talk to our parents, so they, we stay at the level of the ladder that we need to, and we're not going up the ladder if it's not necessary. So really appreciate that. I'm going to turn the same question over to you, Dr. Wickman and Mr. Lopez.
Yeah, and I think coming through in that same, continuing to build and refine the systems. And so coming into a spot where the system is used to that assessment, it really is a reinforcing that no, this is effective. This is what the research shows. And then also look at our results that we have been able to consistently do. So then for us, and Tim will jump in too, it's ensuring that systems are very systems sometimes can revert back to something if you are not, tilling the ground and paying attention to it because, oh, it works well. So now we can move on and do something else. And so just continuing to reinforce that. And Jim, you can jump in and kind of your thoughts with that too.
Yeah, I think one of the importance for us is just that early identification. To have a student that's not sitting in the back of the room, you don't understand why they're struggling, but we get some clear data that can provide next steps for our teachers. So I think that's one of the most important things is early identification. And then the next step would be, so within the system, how then are we going to support that student with the additional tutoring, that high dosage tutoring, individual one-to-one support, how often we need to meet with the students. I think all those things are important for us.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's what is on the top of everybody's mind is like, okay, so what's next? If a student is a flag for risk, what are some of the next steps? And dun, 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 we're going to have another webinar pretty soon where we are going to be talking about instruction and intervention. So that is coming. But I really do appreciate that. It's like we need the data now. We need the data early. So our students aren't waiting until they're in third grade to then, where we're finding out, oh, I think they need intervention. And then by that time, the intervention is a lot more challenging. And, versus if we start earlier. So really appreciate those points. The last question that I will share with you or ask you is what is one piece of advice that you would give school districts as they look to create or improve their assessment plans and processes? And so I will turn this over to you, Dr. Estrada.
So one of the key steps that we take whenever we're adopting curriculum or assessment is that we engage with a team of educators out in the field doing the work. That stakeholder engagement is really important. One, it lets you know what are they looking for in a good, assessment or in a good curriculum. So we want to make sure we understand what they're looking for so we can identify that. So listening to the stakeholders is important. The second one I mentioned earlier, communicate the why, not just the what. It's easy enough to say we're going to do all these kinds of things. There's a lot of ways to be able to assess. I think as the panel before us shared, there are different types of assessments. So again, making sure that we explain that why has been really creative. And let me tell you, I've stumbled along the way. Like one of the things that we pivoted was, even with our iReady assessment, if I have students who already demonstrated they're above the grade level standards, why am I going to have them do the end of year? I already have the ESPA coming. No need to do that too. So making those decisions, determining informing, like really, as they shared earlier, why you're doing this. And so then what's it assessing and how is it going to inform me? So do we really need it? I think the other is making an investment in training, that professional development, and hold your vendors accountable. All those who know me know that I believe in that. Hold your partners accountable. They are responsible for that PD plan just as much as you are, and they want to. They want to make sure it's being used with fidelity. And so they've been an important part, but our professional development, and it's even differentiated to different schools and what they may need, also really matters. And the last piece is, and we've talked about it, the data itself is not useful if people don't actually use it and don't know how to be able to use it to inform their next decision. So our Plan, Do, Study Act is an important aspect of our district overall. If you go to any of our schools, they should be able to tell you what they're focused on instructionally and what are they seeing in their data as their next decision. One of the things my principals are asking for, maybe demanding, but they want to see, is to be able to have time with their instructional leadership team at the middle of year to be able to review their data and start making some decisions as part of their principal PD. And that's a great request, and it really reflects the kind of culture we're building around data-informed decisions. We need to create the time for them to do that as well.
Thank you so much for that. And I will turn the question now over to Dr. Wickman and Mr. Lopez.
Dr. Garcia, I froze, so that's number 3, correct?
We're on number 4. So what is one piece of advice?
I froze for a long time, so okay.
No, it's okay. I think we're all kind of freezing, so no worries.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Really kind of echoing a lot of what Dr. Estrada said. Everything that we do in Sanger Unified, we do with the staff that is going to implement that. So guiding coalitions are something that you'll see at every single school site that we have. And those are the PLC leads, the principal, the CSP, coming through and looking at the information and giving us suggestions coming up. Tim's team does an amazing job. We were looking at textbooks adoption, just as an example, coming through, and we've got our PLC leads from those grade levels. We get subs to come in, and they're looking at that information and giving us recommendations based on what they do in the classroom. So we make sure that we get the right systems in place, whether that's the screeners. We did the same thing, even though we were using Dibbles. We went through that same process with the 4 identified options in the state of California. We went through it as if, we're not going to make an assumption. We ended up with Dibbles M-Class, but everybody had the input coming through there. So I think when you look at it, it cannot be top down. It has to be, driven from the practitioners that are going to do that. And then Tim, you can jump in and.
Yeah, I'll just mention 2 things. One, and I said it before, the systemness has to be present. If you don't have good, solid systems with consistency and coherence, those actions don't take place. The changes don't take place. We have to all be on the same page. And most of this was driven by our early literacy task force that we've had in place for several years that helps drive these decisions that we've made. One thing we've had to do, though, and this is number 2, is we've had to convene a secondary task force for literacy. Because what we have found is students that went through COVID, they had gaps in their literacy. So how do you then consider attacking literacy for students 4th through 8th grade? What does that look like? Because it is no longer the same. You can't give them kindergarten textbooks to read. That's not going to work. So we are addressing that issue, and we're working through what that looks like. And I think it's going to open more doors for kids.
Yeah. The other thing, Bonnie, and we talked a little bit about this before, it takes time. When you look at where Sanger Unified is, we have been working on this. Our leadership has been very stable. We have been working on this since 2013, 2014, and it's that gradual improvement upon the system that has got us to where we're at, which when you look at the results, it was a great year. We've been doing well up to that point, but I think that traction and that consistency, as Mr. Lopez says, across the system, everybody's moving in that same direction, but it takes time. There is no magic. There is no magic formula except hard work and consistency and being able to stay through some of the turmoil that comes with the jobs that we're in, whether there's some that we can control and some that we can't, but it is there.
I appreciate that. And what I took away from this last, there's a lot, but I was writing down some nuggets, and that is hold your vendors accountable, align your curriculum and your system, and it's a process and it takes time. So really appreciate the discussion with you, Dr. Estrada, Dr. Wickman, and Mr. Lopez. I am going to go ahead and now turn it over to Nancy. We have 4 minutes left. And so
the last thing that I'll say, anybody, we're good with people coming and visiting, and we'll help anybody that we can. So we always throw that out there. Tim's team is great. We're there. So anybody who wants to come and visit, just let us know. We're good. So
thank you, Dr. Wick. I was just going to say, Nancy's going to share resources, and that's a resource right there. Thank you.
That's the best resource of all, is the other people. What we'd like to do is invite all our panel members, both panels, to just be on screen for a moment so that we can have some final words. I see that Dr. Estrada has answered the question about changing hearts, and getting buy-in for these assessment processes. We've also had some questions about what kinds of supports do you provide for administrators for all of this. So really, we'll beg forgiveness for this wonderful audience and just ask you each for just one last thought. Anyone like to go first? All right, that means I get to pick on somebody.
I'll go.
Okay.
I'll go. I just jump in. It doesn't have to be perfect. Get
That's
your
right.
systems together. Build your team that's going to work around you.
Adria, last thoughts?
I wish I would have brought up more multitudes. You guys have multitudes. That is the coolest assessment I have ever seen in my entire life. You all are so lucky you have it. I can say that because I'm not associated with it, and it's way cool. So, and I'm super impressed with all the work you all are doing. Keep up the awesome work.
Well, thank you for that. And from being outside California, you may say that. Um, Dr. Kim, would you have any last words?
Absolutely. I want to say thank you for all the work you're doing. And I heard that, hearing the second panel, it was amazing to hear actually all these things in action. I guess one thing I would say is there's actually a lot of resources in the DOE, and I believe it's underutilized. So I encourage people to actually look up and see what's there. There's really a lot of useful things.
Thank you so much, Matt. And then I'll circle back to our school district partners for the last words.
Sure. Yeah. No, I really like what Tim just said is jump in, collaborate. Like what I said earlier, collaborate and communicate. Iterate would be another one in there, right? There's no perfect assessment. There's no perfect curriculum. It takes all of us working together. And so whatever ways you can do that, asking those difficult questions, digging deeper, whatever it might be.
Thank you. Absolutely. Dr. Wickman?
Just being able to listen to everything, it just really is encouraging and gets us fired up to listen to the amazing things that are happening across the state of California. So love being able to listen to that. And I always tell people, we have the absolute best jobs in the world. It is, you've got to jump in and do something, but we have the ability to change another human being's life every single day. And that driving North Star, everything that we do goes into that. So super proud to be an educator and being able to sit around with people who are doing the same work. So thank you for everybody for what you do, and super proud to be part of it.
Thank you. And Dr. Strada, your final word?
Final words. I think this is something that literacy itself is such an important skill set for our kids, but it's also something that opens the doors for our kids. So if we do not break through this literacy barrier for our children, we already know what those outcomes are going to look like. And so I think where I always remind folks is remember that we're always trying to do right by our students. And so there is nothing that's perfect, whether it's curriculum or it's assessment, whether it's how you're applying it in your teacher moves, to how we're ensuring that we're being informed by those teacher moves in that curriculum and assessment. All those things matter. And I think the most important thing to think about, because we know it's fundamental and that it's a social justice issue if we're not careful, is that we have to be adaptive. As I shared with you, I shared some of our stumbles, our learnings, our continuous adaptation of our literacy plan. Don't be afraid to do that. And the best way to be able to do that is to work collaboratively. And I know that's a tough word, but I promise you it pays off. So continue to do that.
Well, thank you very much all. I just want a huge round of applause for all the panel members. I feel very enriched by this conversation. And I did put, well, I may do it again, but an email address for follow-up questions, comments, and compliments, which we would take. But that's just my humor at the end of the day, for anything that we can support you with. So thank you very much. And Bonnie, any last thoughts on your part?
No, you summed it up. Just thank you. Really appreciate your time and your support making California even better.